have some very unique lessons today. That first lesson from Job is when God starts chastising Job for questioning him. And God says, do you have the power to do the things that I do? And of course the answer is Job doesn't. And then we have the Psalm, which acknowledges God's power. And then we have the passage from Hebrews, which talks about Jesus and the power of God. And then we come down to the gospel. And here we have the sons of Zebedee, James and John, assuming they have the power. They say to Jesus, and they're really pretty sneaky. They're like a teenager. No offense, kids. And they said to Jesus, will you grant us whatever we ask? And he says, what do you want? And they said, well, in paradise, we want to sit one on your left side and one on your right side. And Jesus says, you're not ready to drink the cup from which I drink. Now, as it came to pass, they did end up drinking from that cup. James was beheaded and killed by Herod after the crucifixion. And John was exiled to Patmos, and then from Patmos ended up in Ephesus and died there after writing what we believe he was the author of the Gospel of John. Now, they're saying to Jesus, we got what it takes. We got what it takes. Give us the power. Just take a look at us. We are cool. We're hanging right in there with you. But Jesus doesn't look at the outside. Jesus looks at what's inside. And that's why when he said to them, can you drink from the cup? Can you be baptized with the baptized? I'm baptized. And they say, we are able. And Jesus says, I'm not sure you can do that. Now, this reminded me of one part in the city of Rome. Now, you didn't think you're going to get a sermon without me mentioning Italy, did you? When we arrived in Rome, we took a taxi cab from the train station to our hotel. And it was an exciting cab ride, to say the least. But it went by these ruins, right in a business section. It was right in an area where there were a lot of businesses and a lot of traffic. And as I come to find out, it was only about 3 blocks from our hotel. So we dropped our luggage off and we went out exploring right off the bat, and we went over to this place. It's a sacred site, the Largo of Argentina. It's just a fascinating place. You can still see columns. Now, this was discovered in 1926 when they were excavating to build something. They uncovered this ruin. And they were able to date it. Part of the temples that were built there date back to 3 BC. That's pretty old. Well, we took some pictures and we thought, this is really interesting. One of the other interesting things is there are about 1,000 feral cats living in that site. And they have a place where you can adopt a cat. We didn't think we could get one through customs, so we didn't. But it was really beautiful, and I didn't understand the significance of it until the next day when we had joined our tour group, and we were going from the Vatican to the Colosseum. The tour bus went right by this site. Now, we noticed when we were there, the road was under construction. Orange cones, orange barrels, orange tape. I thought, that must be a worldwide thing. I've seen that before in Kansas. It must be summer in Rome. Well, as the bus went by, the tour guide said, do you see how the road is all tore up? And the bus slowed down and we could look and it was all tore up, but as you looked into the pit, you saw more ruins. And they said, this happens in Rome all the time. We dig something up to fix it, like the highway, and we discover something historical. And now we don't know what to do. Because on the surface it was just a highway, but underneath there were ruins that date back to the time of Christ. And they said, we're trying to figure out, and they've been trying to figure out for 10 or 15 years, what to do with that. Because you don't want to destroy something historical. Well, I got thinking, that's kind of like the Zebedee brothers, and kind of like you or I. On the surface, we all are what we are. Some of us are cooler than others. Some of us are taller. But inside, underneath the surface, there's some valuable historical archives. There's some stuff in us that are really important. And I will tell you right now, one of the things that's inside me that I want you to know is a man who is about 75 pounds lighter. You cannot see it, I know, but believe me, he's in there. You see, when Jesus is talking to the sons of Zebedee and they ask him to sit on the right and sit on the left, he doesn't see the sons of Zebedee. He sees their hearts. And he knows that they cannot live up to what he is going to do. You and I need to take a lesson from that. We should be careful judging people by the outside. Because inside, every one of us, there is something valuable. You know, we've got an election coming up, and the people here in Hutchinson, Reno County, get to vote on a proposition. I just ask you, as you consider how to vote, are you voting for the way some people's lifestyle looks on the outside? Or do you want to find the value within them in that vote? It's a difficult choice. But we have to be careful that we do not judge people by the outside appearance of their lifestyle, by their color, by their gender, by their nationality, or by the way their skin happens to be shaped. Now, Jesus knew that. Jesus knew that God alone has the power to whether or not these two boys were going to sit on the left or right side of him. God alone had that power. And that's what God was trying to make clear to Job. I got the power. You don't. That's what the psalmist is saying. God has the power. We don't. You see, we find strength with God. We don't find strength in the outward, invisible part of our being. We find strength by the inward and spiritual part of our being. I have a good friend, Tim Holt. Tim is a Hutch boy and grew up in this congregation. And he sends me a lot of email things, not many of them which I could read in church. But he sent one that I thought was really appropriate for the lessons today. A basketball in my hands is worth about $19. A basketball in LeBron James's hand is worth about $16 million. It just depends whose hands it's in. A baseball in my hands is worth about $6. A baseball in Justin Verlander's hands is worth $80 million. It just depends whose hands it's in. A tennis racket in my hands is useless, unless there's a bat in the house. But a tennis racket in Roger Federer's hands is worth millions. It just depends whose hands it's in. A rod in my hands might keep away an angry dog, but a rod in Moses' hands will part the mighty sea. It just depends whose hands it's in. A slingshot in my hand is a kid's toy. A slingshot in David's hands is a mighty weapon. It just depends whose hands it's in. 2 fish and 5 loaves in my hands, a couple fish sandwiches. 2 fish and 5 loaves in Jesus' hands will feed 1,000. It just depends whose hands it's in. So you see, it just depends whose hands it's in. So put your concerns, your worries, your fears, your hopes, your dreams, your families, and your relationships in God's hands. Because it depends whose hands it's in. When we give ourselves up to God, we place ourselves in God's hands. Jesus placed himself in God's hands. You know, Jesus only asked for one thing in his ministry. Anyone know what that was? When he prayed, he said, I pray that this cup would pass me by. But he finished that sentence by saying, but it is your will, thy will be done. He placed himself in God's hands. And he went through Good Friday, but because he was in God's hands, there was Easter morning. When we place ourselves in God's hands and we let others be in God's hands, life is a whole lot better. Jesus said, whoever wishes to become great among you must become a servant. Whoever wishes to become first must be slave of all. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. And when the sons of Zebedee said, we can drink from that cup, what they were saying is, we come to serve. The question we all need to ask ourselves, are we here to serve? Are we here willing to place ourselves in God's hands? Are we willing to allow the value of others that may be hidden from us to be realized by God? And are we willing in our lives to treat every person with the respect and dignity they deserve? Put yourself in God's hands. Put yourself in God's hands. Amen.